guys, welcome back to the channel. For those of you who are new, this channel is all about math, science, and as well we're going to add language at both the elementary and the high school level. So thank you for joining me today. Today we're going to continue with our Math 11 content, and the topic today is going to be on inverse functions, okay? And so let's get started. What we're going to do, the most common question is basically, the question will ask you, it'll give you a function, and it will say either write the equation of the inverse function or maybe like graph it out. So today we're going to focus on just writing out the equation of inverse functions. Okay, so let's try this example here. Okay, so again, f of x just means that basically this equation is a function. So we're going to try 2x plus 3 squared, okay, minus 4. All right. And so what you do when you're making this or you're finding the equation of the inverse function, instead of writing f of x, okay, we're going to write y so we don't get confused. So I'm going to put y equals 2 and then x plus 3 squared minus 4. Okay, everyone sees that? All we did is change the f of x into y, okay? In the next step, we're going to just switch around the x and y variables. So I'm going to write x equals 2 and then y plus 3 squared minus 4. Okay, everyone's with me so far? And what we're doing after we switch the x and y variables is we're going to just isolate for y. Okay, I'm going to take this negative 4 to the other side. It's going to be x plus 4 equals 2 y plus 3 squared. Okay, and after we do that, what we're going to do is divide by 2 on both sides. So before you take the square root on both sides, you should make sure you are dividing. Okay, so I'm going to put divided by 2. And again, the reason we're doing that is so this 2 cancels out. Okay, and in the next step, so let's just continue it over here. Okay, so I'm going to take the square root on both sides. Okay, so it's going to be basically square root x plus 4 divided by 2. And again, when you're taking the square root, okay, I actually have a plus or minus. So I see that I can end up, what I'm going to end up with is 2 solutions at the end, okay? And on this side, I'm left with y plus 3, okay? And so the reason that we're taking the square root like this on both sides is so that this actual squared sign is going to cancel out, okay, when you take the square root. Okay, so you can see what we're left with so far. It's the y plus 3. I'm isolating the y. Okay, so we're going to take the positive 3 to the other side. Okay, and it's going to become negative. Okay, and whenever you write this number, it should be actually in front of that square root sign. So it's going to be negative 3 plus or minus square root x plus 4 divided by 2. Okay, does everyone see that? And this is basically my final answer. Okay, I can see that the f of x is restricted here. Okay, we will write x has to be greater than or equal to negative 3. Okay, so I'm just gonna box my answer here, and that's the restriction for the value of x here. Okay, you can actually check the restriction by sketching out a graph. Okay, and that will show you exactly what the domain and range would be of this function. Okay, so are there any questions? It looks all right. Okay, so one more time, let's just go through the steps and then we'll try one more example. Okay, so the steps is I have the f of x function given to me. Okay, in the second step, we're changing the f of x into y. Okay, right after that, we're gonna switch the x and y over, okay, and switch them around. And then all we're doing here is isolating for the y variable. All right. And that gives you the f of x function. Actually, instead of writing y here, what we should be writing is f prime of x. Okay, and the prime is basically just that small line on top that I'm writing. Okay, and then I'm going to rewrite the function negative 3 plus or minus, let's make it bigger here, square root x plus 4 over 2. Okay, so this is actually how you should be writing it. Okay, if you take a look in the textbook, all of the functions, it'll just be writing, what they write here is just f prime of x. Okay, it's not going to write, they're not going to write y here. Okay, All right, so that looks good. Okay, so let's try another example here. And again, I'm going to take this off. We are only looking for the f of x function. Okay, so I'll keep the f of x on here, okay? As in, we're only looking for the equation for the inverse function right now. Okay, even if there is a graph given to you, because there are several graphs here, I can just find several points on the graph. If it says to graph out the inverse function, you're just going to switch around the x and y coordinates, and that will give you the graph of the inverse function. Okay, let's try this example here. Okay, so f of x equals 7 minus 2 and x minus 1 squared. Okay, so the reason we're doing this example is because there is a negative sign in front of the 2, and I want you to see how that's going to make a difference when you're looking for the inverse function, okay, and the equation. So in the first step, again, I'm just going to change the f of x into y, okay? So we should make sure after we find our final equation, we sub back the f prime of x into the function here, okay? All right, and what we're going to do now is switch around the x and y variables. So we're going to put, instead of y, x equals 7 minus 2. Instead of the x, I'm putting y. So y minus 1 and squared, okay? And now what we're going to do is basically isolate for the y variable. Let's take the 7 over first, okay? So it's positive 7, negative 7 on the left side equals negative 2, y minus 1 squared. Okay, everyone sees that? And make sure you're showing actually all your steps here. Again, if you don't get the final answer at the end, the teacher will still give you part marks for that, okay? And in the next step, again, before we take the square root, I want to make sure I'm dividing by negative 2 on both sides, because I want it to just cancel out here. Okay, so I'm left with my function right here. So again, let's take it to the top here. I'm going to take the square root on both sides. Okay, and now some of you are probably wondering that there is a negative 2 on the bottom, and how do I take the square root of a negative sign, okay, or a negative number? But again here, this is just an expression, okay? We're not actually solving it right now. We're just coming up with the expression for the inverse function, all right? So I'm going to put plus or minus. We have x minus 7, okay, over negative 2, and I'm going to make that equal, oh, I guess we don't need the brackets here, okay? I'm just going to put y minus 1. So again, when I take the square root sign here, the squared is just gone, and this is what I'm left with, okay? I'm isolating for y, so I'm going to take the negative 1 to the other side, okay? And I can see that it becomes positive. So let's write our equation out. So y equals positive 1, okay, plus or minus square root x minus 7 over negative 2. Okay, this is actually my final answer. Okay, so instead of writing the y, I'm just going to put the f prime of x. So just like this, okay? And again, don't worry about the negative 2 as the sign here, okay? The reason for this is when I do graph it out, I can pick the actual values and the coordinates, okay, for x and y, and it will actually give you an answer, okay? So let's try substituting. So here it gives you some values like f of 3, okay, or f negative 1, or f prime of 5. That means I'm just going to plug in these values into my equation, okay? So let's try one. So I'm just going to take off what we have on the left side here, okay, because I have my final equation. So let's maybe like box this. Okay, this is my final equation. And for 4a, it says determine f of 3, okay? And f of 3 just means for the value of x, I'm going to plug in the 3, okay? So let's write it here. So it's 1 plus or minus square root 3 minus 7 over negative 2, okay? And all I did was plug in the 3 instead of the x into my equation. And let's try solving this out. So it's 1 plus or minus. So you're going to do 3 minus 7, okay, on the top, which is negative 4, divided by negative 2. Okay, does everyone see that? Okay. And I can see because they both are negatives here, the negatives cancel out. All right, so it's going to be 1 plus or minus, I'm doing negative 4 divided by negative 2, which is equal to 2. Okay, because it's plus or minus here, there will be two values for the x. Okay, so what we'll do is 1 plus square root 2. Okay, on this side, so 1 plus square root 2, and square root 2 is actually 1.4, so I'm getting 2.4. And on the other side, we'll do 1 minus square root 2. Okay, and so again, I just have two actual answers at the very end. So 1 minus square root 2, negative 0.4. And it's okay if you're rounding this to one decimal, okay? When the teacher gives you a question like this, I do have to make sure I am showing both of my values here because there are two answers, okay, at the end here. Okay, for B, it says determine f prime of x, which we did already. This is actually our function for the inverse, okay? Now say that I am plugging in, okay, let's try one more question here. This is a good question. Okay, so I'm going to take this off. Okay, so for most of these inverse questions, the reason that you have two answers is you have to remember that this is actually a parabola, okay? And usually if you graph it out, so let's just make like a sketch here. Okay, so usually if you graph it out, so say this is the parabola, okay? The actual inverse function is going to be a sideways parabola. So the sidewards one would be maybe something like this. That's how the inverse function would actually look, okay? And it depends on what the parabola is, okay? But remember that the inverse function is always going to be sideways, okay? All right, so let's try this one. I was going to choose the f prime of 5 as well, okay? So in the last question, actually, it was f prime of 3, okay? Not just the f3. So maybe let's just make a note of that. So we were doing f prime of 3, okay? And that's why I was actually plugging it into my function right here, okay? And that was just to show you that you can actually get an answer and the negative signs will cancel out, okay? So not f of 3, it's going to be f prime of 3, okay? However, if it just said f of 3, I would just plug in the value into the original equation, not the inverse function, okay? So let's try the f prime of 5, okay? I'm going to plug it back into this equation one more time. So 1 plus or minus square root 5 minus 7 over negative 2. Okay, does everyone see that? Okay, so what we're going to do is just solve this value. Okay, so I'm going to just take this off. Okay, so I have 1 plus or minus, we're doing 5 minus 7 again, which is negative 2. So negative 2 over negative 2, okay? And when you divide that, that's just equal to 1. So I have 1 plus or minus square root 1, okay? The square root 1 is just equal to 1. So basically, it's 1 plus or minus 1, okay? However, again, I do notice that I have two answers here. So the first one, I'm going to do 1 plus 1, which is equal to 2, okay? And the second answer is going to be 1 minus 1, which is equal to 0. Okay, so these are actually my two answers. And again, if you do just put like one answer, the teacher can take marks off, okay, for that. You have to have two values. This is a parabola. It is symmetrical on both sides, all right? So make sure every time you take the square root sign here, I have to make sure I put the plus or minus sign. And that way I know I have two answers and I won't mess it up at the very end when I'm getting my two roots, okay? All right, so that looks good and that brings this video to an end. Again, we covered Math 11. The topic was on inverse functions. Make sure you are doing a lot of practice questions from the textbook and make sure you are grasping this concept because it is very important. And perhaps in the next video, we can actually go through how to graph the inverse functions as well. What's really important is that you're able to come up with the equation of the inverse function, okay? Because even when you graph it out, I can actually just take some values of x and plug it into my inverse function, and I can very easily graph it as well, all right? So thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and I will see everyone next time. Thanks, bye.